Hey, JD Gagnon here with Ceara. We are starting today, first day ever of the Go Fund Yourself weekly podcast, daily podcast. Every weekday, every day of the week, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, we're going to do a kind of conversation style podcast talking about news, events of the day, just stuff that's happened and some opinions. So it's intended to be half an hour, 30 minutes. The format will probably evolve. Tops, 30 minutes tops. Format will evolve over time, probably. Might go a little bit longer once we start having more guests and different people on the podcast. But for now, we'll just kick it off. So today's day one. If you're watching, welcome. Bear with us. We're going to get better at this. But the idea is to just share, as much information, as much content as we possibly can, given, our experience in the space and hopefully provide some insight to people. We're not monetizing this. We're not doing any paid paid, sections or anything. At some point we might add, some sponsor for the episodes or something, but it's not going to be, pay to play. So everything we talk about is
right now it's just us.
just us. So yeah, Ceara's the one that's gonna have most of the ideas. I'm just here because I've got a pretty face, and hopefully we add some value.
And such a nice camera and background. You really add like the quality chutzpah to what we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's all fake, right? Like those aren't real books or anything. Actually, they are, but I don't think.
But you've never read them? Yeah.
Not those ones. No.
This isn't what we talked about, but today's Valentine's Day.
Yep.
What do you love in the DeFi space right now?
What do I love in the DeFi space?
Yeah.
Well, I love a lot of shit actually that's going on, but there's been some really cool developments lately, I think, with meaningful cross blockchain communication structures. So whether it's IBC on Cosmos or AWM for Avalanche, or if you're looking at the eventual release of CCIP from Chainlink, or Wormhole Layer 0 and the others that also have some sort of implementation along those lines. I think that to me is really compelling. There's a lot of interesting startups that are coming out that are supporting this in a more kind of nuanced way. So each little business has their own kind of niche focus, which is really, really interesting. I think that's going to completely change the paradigm. I think, the way that the last couple of cycles, last one in particular, where it was kind of the layer one arms race, I suspect we're going to see something a little bit different this time around. And so that's exciting. I've been following that pretty closely. I think it impacts a lot of our projects. I think it impacts, it just impacts the space in a much deeper way. Tooling, user experience, being able to bring some of that stuff, obfuscate some of that stuff kind of behind the front end so that the user doesn't really know. The parallel that I generally draw is it's kind of like the internet or an email, right? If you send someone an email, do you really care necessarily, as long as you're comfortable with security and so on? Do you really care or even know or care to know how that email gets sent? Like, what is the process? Where does it go? What servers does it go through? Yada, yada. No. All you really care about, generally speaking, with respect to the internet is, did it do what I expected it to do?
Yeah.
That's it. And did it cost me money or not? And was it exorbitant? And what kind of security is there? Same shit. What about you? Who are you sending Valentine's cards to today in DeFi?
Oh, well, we actually did send Valentine's cards to all of our partners, for real.
Nice.
They're on Twitter. Yeah. That's fun. It was a fun little activity to think about why we liked everyone,
That's cool. We had to do that. My wife and I did it for our kids last night. And she's like, what are 10 things you love about each of our kids? I was like, that's a lot. I probably don't like them that much. But anyways, I'm just kidding. We made all these little, you remember those like little, it was like powder, like powdered sugar stamped into like a heart. And then it said, be mine, or what are those called?
Yeah.
Anyways, we made a whole
hearts.
Is that love hearts? I don't know. Anyways, we made a whole bunch of those and taped them to the kids' doors when they got up, and then we hand wrote cards for them. And I'm not usually one to get into it, but My wife went kind of crazy about it yesterday. Kids were fired up this morning, so it's good. Hopefully our partners are that fired up too.
That's cute.
Yeah, it was fun.
You know, every year I do a Galentine's event. So
A what?
sorry. Every year I do a Galentine's event. So on the 13th, we get a bunch of women together and we do some sort of event, and it's like a love fest for girls. But the point of it is that we always make a donation to something. So this year we did a clothing swap, and almost nobody took anything home. So we did clothing, housewares, toys, that kind of stuff. And then today it's getting donated to a single moms group where we live. And so every year for Valentine's and other types of holidays, I try to do things like that. And funny segue, because that's actually the thing that I think is great about DeFi right now, is there aren't a lot of new players and there's not a lot of gatekeeping right now. There's just a lot of helping people and sharing information and figuring out how to navigate what's coming up. And I find that right now in the DeFi ecosystem, people are coming together more and hating each other less than actually during the bull run. So that's kind of what I like right now. But
couldn't agree more, actually. I saw some interesting kind of collaborative discussions about apparently there's going to be a Cosmos SDK version on an Avalanche subnet. I'm not exactly sure how it was just kind of teased, but and both ecosystems seemed pretty excited about that potential of working together, which generally, again, the L1 wars have been fairly contentious, right? Like most often, the maxis of one chain are just hating on the other chain without even really understanding it. And I mean, sure, I have my preferred blockchain ecosystems also, but I think there's a lot of really interesting novel technology being built, and the collaborative nature, I think right now of the teams that have remained, is definitely palpable. You can feel the shift, which is exciting, because I think you got rid of a lot of the opportunists. Anybody that thought it was going to be super easy money, fork a project, do a public sale, and somehow within a year you're going to be, a deca-millionaire. Realize that's not usually how that works. You actually have to build something that has value, and it takes some time. And then maybe you can capitalize on the value yourself after you've done a service and built value for others. So I think there's a lot of, go ahead.
That's interesting too, because I'm sure everyone is talking about BUSD today. And I was reading about it. And that's the part of the how test, right? The Howey test is, are you purchasing something just to make money? And if we no longer have that same type of person within the ecosystem, how does that change how regulation might impact us, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I don't necessarily mean that individual traders. I meant more like projects. Like the people that are building projects are not as obviously opportunists now. Like the people that remain are people that build during the sentiment and of a bear market. You're committed generally. You believe in what you're doing. It's not jump on a bandwagon. You're doing something that you believe is going to make a difference. And if you've gone from trough to peak a few times, you realize that a lot of the people that you thought might stick around don't. And you see who really is here for the long haul, and that's definitely interesting. In terms of BUSD, maybe we can transition to that. That's probably kind of one of the bigger pieces of news, I guess, going on right now. I mean, the BUSD thing, Paxos in particular, getting the Wells notice from the SEC. I mean, we're probably going to talk about regulation and SEC related stuff almost every time, because it is, I think,
so hot right now.
yeah, it's temperature's up for sure, but it's definitely interesting. And I mean, for what it's worth, and I guess we should say this at the beginning of every episode, the opinions here are our personal opinions. Neither of us are attorneys. Neither of us are financial planning professionals. Neither of us are accountants. So anything we say is just our opinion. It's how we feel about it. Could be wrong. If we ever say anything incorrect, we'll absolutely correct ourselves. We will post sources over time when we start to have more and more references. We'll have sources on our videos all the time so that you can actually confirm the things that we're saying. But as far as the Wells notice goes, I found it kind of interesting that Paxos was was the first one for a host of reasons. I mean, there's arguments on both sides, but from a stablecoin issuer perspective, I was surprised because Paxos, is a regulated entity in many other ways already. They're a well-respected firm. They understand compliance and so much of that nuance. They have a really good, deep understanding. So to see the SEC, potentially going after someone like that, it was kind of surprising to me. I guess what I expected to happen, which doesn't mean much, but what I expected to happen was we would get some version of a framework, some version of a regulatory framework, even a very loosely defined one, but one that had some goalposts. And then they would say, okay, who are the most egregious, examples that aren't moving towards compliance here? And let's start really protecting consumers. Ultimately, let's protect the end consumer from a lot of these kind of quasi questionable. I'm surprised that they went after some people that are probably doing it as close to the regulated way as possible. I'm surprised that they went after those types of people, and how it implicates Binance is a little suspect because it's Paxos only issues on Ethereum, and then Binance with USD to other networks and so on. And so there's, but Binance wasn't named. The SEC probably is trying to avoid a big fight with someone that has enough firepower. And so we'll see. I mean, it's unfortunate that Paxos says they're not going to support BUSD. Mints anymore. They'll support redemptions and so on. But we'll have to wait and see how that all plays out. There's a lot of concern there, though. Like from a DeFi perspective, I mean, the peg should hold because you can always redeem. It's over collateralized, so you can always redeem. You can get your value back if you burn your BUSD. You should be able to get your value back in the underlying collateral. But there's a lot of activity that happens on chain in between that. So you can swap products. You can swap from, BUSD to others. There's a whole bunch of other things you can do that change the price of BUSD on chain. So it could depeg on chain, even though in reality the value still exists. And if it does that, what are the impacts on quasi bank run for, lending protocols, options, derivatives, futures? Like there's just so many financial products that, we really had to take a pause and be like, holy crap, what are the long tail impacts of this? Short term, probably not super concerning, but long term, as liquidity starts to dry up and they start to deprecate the asset, I mean, it becomes a larger risk. And so I think that's been interesting. It's weird to watch the regulators right now in the US. I mean, I'm obviously biased in a certain way, but it's interesting to watch because what it seems like they're doing is they're going after your on and off ramps and your connections from fiat to crypto. And I'm not sure if that's just coincidence or if that's by design. But as an American or as somebody living in America or any Western nation, Canada has very similar rules to America now, and many other Western nations have the same. I mean, I don't know. They're making it really difficult to get in and out of crypto, and that's kind of the antithesis of the point. The point is access, is transparency, like being able to do this stuff without a whole bunch of crazy restrictions. And so we've got to find a middle ground, and I think that'll be interesting. Like this whole did you see Gensler's video the other day?
No.
Maybe on a future episode we'll have to show it. But
Okay.
anyways, Gensler came out with a video that more or less implied that both Kraken, which was last week, and Paxos, it would have been as simple as filling out a form on the SEC website. That's actually not true at all. And so the challenge here is if the US wants to remain competitive in terms of being a global tech leader, this is an area undoubtedly that will significantly change global commerce, change the internet, change finance globally. And so we either need to find a way to enable ingenuity and entrepreneurship in America, or we're going to be left in the dust, I think. And so it will be interesting. Be interesting to see what happens. But they do need to make it. They do need to make it easier. I mean, the average DeFi protocol trying to test a new concept, you're never going to be able to raise $10 million and spend a year and a half just to get the regulatory approvals, if you even can get the approvals. I mean, it's very interesting. That's the problem with traditional finance, is it is significantly weighted towards the incumbents, and that isn't the spirit, generally speaking, of capitalism. And so we'll have to see how that evolves. Hopefully, and we're happy to be a part of the conversation, but hopefully there's enough meaningful players in America, and there is. You see, Brian Armstrong and the Coinbase policy team. Faryar is amazing. Some incredibly well-versed individuals in policy. Hopefully we can influence. Hopefully we can have a say in how this happens. But I mean, what is the government really trying to do? Protect people from, being scammed or misled, right? Misinformed about things, and make sure that everybody pays their taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, let's call a spade a spade. The government wants their pound of flesh, and rightly so, right? I get it. So let's first figure that out. What is the lowest minimum acceptable standard that gives us a baseline? Let's just make sure everybody adheres to that first, so that we know there's proper reporting. We know there's proper, at least transparency of information for users. Let that be the simple baseline. And then we can, make more complex regulations after. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that whole thing? I know I can go on for hours on regulation.
That's why you're here. It's interesting because this is one of the arguments I hear about crypto versus cash all the time, is that the intention of crypto for some people, was to be deregulated, but it's never untraceable. So lots of people stick with cash for whatever they're doing, whether it's tips or paid labor or what have you, because they don't have to pay the taxes on it if they can illegally evade them, right? And with crypto, with blockchain, you're never going to be able to lack a ledger. So there's always the transparency of how much is moving around and why it's moving around. And that is one of the holdbacks of a lot of people I know who think that the revolution of finance is there, but it's overwhelming to them to think that they could be controlled in a new way. But it isn't really new. It's just a different ledger, right? It's really interesting.
It is super, super interesting. I mean, and this is, I think, what's causing us so much angst at the moment, between us as builders in the space and regulators and even the end users, is it's just, it's impossible to predict what's going to happen. They hint at certain things and then they enforce other things. And I mean, even if the resulting regulation is somewhat frustrating to us, at least we would know what it is. And so we can act accordingly. None of us want to be outside of compliance. Right. I mean, of course, we want to build technologies and we want to, push the limits of what's possible, but we don't want to be running into issues with, with government agencies, of course. But when crypto first started, I mean, that's the problem, is we focused so much in the early days on privacy and anonymity, because that was the piece of crypto that was usable at that point. So when Bitcoin first came out, for all intents and purposes, that there wasn't sophisticated tracking software. It was generally at the time quite anonymous, because the only way to buy it was in person, or for the first couple of years, or not couple of years, but for the first little while. And then there were some exchanges and KYC wasn't, whatever. But as blockchain has evolved, in my opinion, anonymity, first of all, is a bit of a misnomer. There's not really such a thing as anonymity anymore. And privacy, yes, there's mechanisms that we can create privacy from the average person, but I think we're deluded if we ever think that the government is just going to accept private financial transactions of any size globally. It's just not going to happen. And so, but there's so many things that are 0-to-1 innovations. There's so many things that blockchain really enables. Again, the transparency, the immutability, the borderless transactions, 24/7 availability, like it just enables so many people, low fees, simplicity, generally speaking. And yeah, there's potential for some privacy later on, and maybe in some cases, potential for anonymity, at least public anonymity. And all that stuff is fantastic. But, some people are just still stuck on that. The government's going to stay out of my business. No, they're not. Like until we get to a point in society where we're like, government doesn't work, we don't want one anymore, there's going to be oversight. And
different regime.
What is the government? Yeah, different, but even a different regime, it's all the same. Like, generally speaking, when you have a large enough bureaucracy overseeing 350 million people, they have to create structures.
Exactly.
You have to create rules that are geared towards your worst actors, right? Regulations are annoying for most of us because we're not doing anything malicious or negligent anyways.
Yeah. Here's something else that's kind of interesting in that vein, if I could. It's a little bit Margaret Atwood, so bear with me here. But we're seeing a lot of regulation. Maybe that's a loose term to use here, but we're seeing a lot of standards set by companies and projects within the crypto space, right? So I mean, like big movers, Binance, Coinbase, that kind of thing. They're large, they're huge, they're laying out what they expect to see. And in some ways, that's been who's regulating the crypto market thus far. Right. And some of the things that I was reading yesterday in relation to the regulations and SEC and all that is that the sentiment of having a branded stable coin can become quite negative, because it's kind of like, I mean, we don't have a Deutsche Bank dollar, right? Like we don't have an HSBC USD. So why do we have BUSD, or why do we have TUSD, right? And I think that's a really interesting concept. It's like, are we buying into a different type of overlord or a different type of expectation that is still the management of what we're doing, or is there some sort of different tactic to having a branded stablecoin?
It's an interesting concept, and I mean, I think stablecoin is maybe too narrow of a definition, but there's some really interesting implementations where they're trying to create contract-focused tokens. So something that can be the contractual reference, but it's not necessarily pegged to some sort of foreign currency or local currency. And there's some interesting challenges. I'm not sure if anybody's got it right, but I've read a few papers recently that if practice is close to theory, it could be pretty cool. I think that it comes down to, on that point of like whether it's branded or whether it's like a government, CBDC, facilitated via the central bank, which we could spend a whole episode on. Whether we like it or not, I still think that is going to be a reality no matter what. Whether we like it or not, CBDCs are going to be most likely a very common thing in 5 years. I don't know that with certainty, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case. There's a lot of major governments looking at doing it. Some have already deployed CBDCs. I just think it's another way that government can have oversight and control, and bureaucracy wants power. It's the nature. So that's interesting. I think the reason that there's different opinions on this is because some people believe that the power of the US dollar, for example, is as a contract asset, something that is used and referenced in contracts globally and as a global currency for means of trade. That's awesome, except for the fact that there is so many things beyond the economic performance of that asset that impact the value of that asset. Geopolitics, credit rating, like a whole bunch of credit rating of the US government, GDP, total debt, prevailing interest rates. Like there's a million things that change the value of the US dollar relative to other global currencies. And there's so many countries that their local currency, I mean, is a ping pong ball. Like it's all over the place. We've seen a lot of unfortunate circumstances, Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, in many cases, where their currencies just get devalued like so fast because of printing, right? Government printing resources. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, the stablecoin thing. I mean, it is becoming somewhat alarming that all of a sudden, what stablecoin is next. And without stablecoins, that's a huge piece of portfolio management, right?
Okay.
So I don't know. Anyways, any other? Ideally, we talk about a few more news pieces. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on?
Well, no, we got roped into the biggest thing right now, I think. Because it's Valentine's Day, let's end this on a love fest, just to like come full circle.
Hell yeah.
Do you have any crypto crushes?
Crypto crushes?
Yeah. Anyone you're like fanboying over?
I don't know.
You've been pretty stoked about Rug Radio. Don't you have like 95 of their NFTs?
Yeah, I'm pretty pumped about Rug Radio, to be honest. I'm also really cool about Product Zero really excited about Product Zero from Probably Nothing. Yeah. It's really going to change the way that the NFT game is played and how you can consume information and stay on top of things. Pretty interested there. Rug Radio, yeah, they did their PFP, the PFP NFT sale. I've got a couple of them. Which is
not 90. I was exaggerating.
I've got more than I should probably, but I mean, for me, again, it's an asset that I think if I have to bet on jockeys, for Oak and Team, there's not too many groups that can build a social platform, a social structure like that, any better than they possibly could. So that's where my bet is on the jockey, not necessarily the current status of Rug Radio. But it's pretty cool. If you follow Rug Radio, they're doing some cool shit. What about you? Who's your crypto crush?
On NFTs, just yesterday I found the Jarrito's Probably Nothing Valentine's drop. It's so cute.
Yeah, it's neat. It's neat how brands are leaning into the Valentine's Day thing. I mean, sometimes it goes too far and it's kind of woke and cheesy and stupid, but there's some interesting ones that have come up.
We should plan something for April Fools, but that might add to the degen scam regulation conversation.
Yeah, that's all we need is somebody to take the joke seriously and think that it's actually happening.
Yeah. Exactly.
I remember when I was this is a stupid story, but I remember when I was in high school, the newspaper of the city I lived in did a thing that we had this huge park in the middle of the city, and it was like a very common place for people to go. It was beautiful, whatever. And they, on the front page of the newspaper, they said they were building a giant dome over this park, and it was pretty serious. Like they wrote a full article as if it was actually going to happen, and I believed it. Like 100% was like, what the hell? There's going to be a dome? Like that's ridiculous. Where are they going to get all the glass? Like how are they going to clean it? Like, and when they finally came out and said it was a joke, I was like super offended. I don't know. So April Fools has kind of been lost on me ever since.
Okay, well,
anyways,
we'll refrain from April Fools. Well, happy Tuesday, and go FUD yourself, JD.
Go FUD yourself. We'll see you all tomorrow. Episode 1 in the books.